Welcome, dear listener, to a journey back through time, back through the fog-shrouded streets of Victorian London, to a place where gaslight barely pierces the darkness, and every shadow might hold a secret. Tonight, we walk together through Whitechapel in the autumn of 1888, through one of history's most enduring mysteries, through streets that knew fear and tragedy and questions that have never been answered. Before we begin, I invite you to settle yourself comfortably. Adjust your pillows, draw your blankets close around you. Take a slow, deep breath in and let it out even more slowly. This is a story for drifting, for letting go, for allowing the past to wash over you like the Thames fog itself, thick and enveloping and strangely soothing in its completeness. If you find comfort in these historical journeys, please press like. If you wish to walk with me through more forgotten streets and distant nights, subscribe and share your thoughts. Your presence here makes this space warmer, makes these old stories live again. Now, let us step back through the years, back to 1888, to the East End of London, to Whitechapel, to the autumn when terror walked the streets, and a name entered history that has never been forgotten. Jack the Ripper. Whitechapel, a world apart. The year is 1888, and London is two cities, perhaps three, perhaps a dozen different worlds, all pressed together on the same island of land beside the Thames. There is the London of the West End, of Mayfair and Belgravia, of grand houses and electric lights beginning to replace the older gas lamps, of carriages and servants, and wealth that seems inexhaustible. There is the London of the city, of banks and businesses, of men in top hats hurrying between offices, of commerce and empire, and the great machine of British power turning its wheels. And then there is Whitechapel. Whitechapel lies in the East End, sprawling outward from the Tower of London toward the docks, a district of narrow streets and narrower alleys, of courts and yards and passages that twist back on themselves like a maze designed by someone who wanted to hide secrets in plain sight. The buildings lean close here, 4 and 5 stories tall, their upper floors sometimes nearly meeting overhead, blocking out the sky, creating permanent twilight even at midday. The population is dense beyond imagining. 30,000 people, perhaps more, perhaps far more if you count those without official residence, those sleeping rough, those moving constantly from one lodging house to another. They press together in these ancient buildings, 8 or 10 or 15 to a room, entire families sharing beds in shifts, sleeping when they can find space, working when they can find work, surviving by whatever means present themselves. The streets are cobbled, but the cobbles are uneven, broken in places, and between them runs filth that never quite dries, never quite washes away despite the rain. The gutters carry refuse and worse flowing toward the Thames, that great river that takes everything London offers it and carries it away to the sea. The smell is constant, inescapable. Horse dung and human waste, rotting vegetables from the markets, the sharp tang of coal smoke that hangs perpetually in the air, the sour smell of too many bodies pressed too close together with too little soap and too little water. But it's not a dead place, this Whitechapel. Far from it. It seethes with life, with energy, with the desperate vitality of people who must keep moving or sink beneath the weight of their circumstances. During the day, the streets are crowded with activity. Costermongers push their barrows, crying out their wares, vegetables, fruit, fish so fresh they still smell of the sea, or so old they smell of something else entirely. Women stand in doorways, gossiping, watching children who play in the streets, darting between the horses and carts, with the fearless confidence of those who've never known safer places to run. The shops are small, their windows often dirty, their interiors dim, but they offer what the neighborhood needs: bread, cheap cuts of meat, used clothing, pawn services, small loans at rates that would be called usury anywhere else, but here are simply called survival. Above the shops, the living quarters press close, window after window rising up the facades, many of them broken and stuffed with rags or paper to keep out the cold. few of them showing curtains or any sign of comfort within. The public houses are numerous, perhaps one for every 100 residents, perhaps more. The 10 Bells, the Britannia, the Queen's Head, dozens of others, their doors swinging open constantly, releasing bursts of warmth and noise, and the smell of beer and gin. These are the social centres, the places where men gather after work, where women meet friends, where the community finds what small joys it can afford, where twopence buys a pint and temporary forgetting of the hardness of daily life. The lodging houses stand on nearly every street, offering beds for 4p a night, or if you haven't 4p, a seat in the kitchen for 2p, or if you haven't even that, the street itself, which costs nothing but may cost everything when the cold comes. The lodging houses are crowded, their dormitories holding 30 or 40 or 50 beds pressed close together, the air thick with breath and sweat, and the sounds of snoring and coughing, and sometimes crying from those whose dreams bring no comfort. And everywhere, always, the fog. London fog is famous, but in Whitechapel it seems thicker, heavier, more present. It rolls up from the Thames in the evening, creeps through the streets like something alive, something searching. It carries the coal smoke with it, turns yellow and thick, becomes what locals call a pea souper, becomes so dense that you cannot see your hand before your face, cannot see the person walking beside you, cannot see anything but that yellow murk pressing close on all sides. The gas lamps try to fight the fog, but they're spaced far apart here, not like in the West End where they stand every 20 feet. Here you might walk 100 feet between lamps, and when the fog is heavy, even the lamps are just dim glows, fuzzy golden spheres that seem to float in the murk like distant dying stars. Between the lamps, the darkness is complete, absolute, broken only occasionally by light spilling from a pub doorway or a window opened to let out cooking smoke or heat. This is Whitechapel in 1888. A place of poverty, yes, but also of community, of people helping each other because no one else will help them. A place of danger, certainly, but also of ordinary life, of children playing and couples courting and families doing their best with what little they have. A place that's been here for centuries, that will be here for centuries more, though it may change, may be improved, may eventually be torn down and rebuilt into something cleaner, safer, more modern. But in the autumn of 1888, Whitechapel is about to become something else as well. It's about to become the stage for one of history's most infamous mysteries. It's about to become the hunting ground for someone who will never be identified, never be caught, never be understood. It's about to become the place where Jack the Ripper walks. The autumn begins. August in Whitechapel is hot and close. The narrow streets trap the heat, hold it between the buildings, create an atmosphere that's thick and hard to breathe. The smell intensifies in the heat, becomes almost visible, almost tangible. People move more slowly, conserve their energy, seek what shade they can find in the alleyways and courts. But August is ending now, giving way to September, and with September comes the first hints of autumn. The evenings grow cooler. The fog returns more frequently, more thickly. People begin to think about winter, about how they'll stay warm, about whether they'll have enough work to pay for lodging when the cold comes in earnest. The streets are busy as always. Women walk to and from the markets, carrying baskets or pushing prams. Men head to the docks before dawn, hoping to be chosen for a day's work loading or unloading ships. Children run errands, sell newspapers, sweep crossings, do whatever small jobs might earn a penny or two. Everyone is moving, working, surviving. Among this crowd are women who walk the streets after dark for a different purpose. They're called unfortunates, a Victorian term that carries judgment and pity in equal measure. They're women who've run out of options, who need 4p for a bed and have no other way to earn it. Some are young, some are older, some are desperate, some are resigned. All of them know the risks: disease, violence, arrest, death. But the alternative is the street, the cold pavement, the slow death of exposure. So they walk. The police know them, know their faces and their habits. Constables on the beat will move them along from certain corners, will tell them to find another street, another district. But the constables also know that they'll be back, that they have to be back, that this is how survival works in Whitechapel. There's an unspoken understanding, a tolerance born of pragmatism rather than compassion. As long as they're not too obvious, as long as they keep moving, as long as they don't cause trouble, the police have bigger concerns. But something is changing in Whitechapel. Something subtle at first, barely noticeable. A sense of unease, a feeling that something isn't quite right. It starts in August, builds slowly through the days and nights, a pressure that doesn't quite break, a storm that threatens but doesn't arrive. On the 31st of August, a Friday, the storm breaks. Her name was Mary Ann Nichols, though everyone called her Polly. She was 43 years old, though she looked older, worn down by life and drink and the countless small cruelties that poverty inflicts. She'd been married once, had 5 children, but that life was long behind her. Now she lived in the lodging houses when she could afford them, on the streets when she couldn't. On this night, she'd spent her DOS money, the 4p she needed for a bed, on drink. The lodging housekeeper turned her away at 1:45 in the morning. She wasn't angry, wasn't surprised. This had happened before. She told him she'd be back soon, that she'd earned the money, that her bonnet was new and she'd have no trouble finding a customer willing to pay for her company. She walked out into the night, into the fog that was beginning to gather, into streets she'd walked 1,000 times before. The gas lamps glowed dimly. A few late-night stragglers moved through the darkness, heading home or heading nowhere in particular. Polly walked east toward Bucks Row, a narrow street lined with warehouses and a few small businesses, quiet at this hour, deserted, the kind of place where a woman might take a customer for a quick transaction in a dark doorway. Somewhere in that darkness, she met someone who seemed ordinary enough to approach, ordinary enough to trust for the few minutes such transactions required. Someone who offered money, or perhaps just seemed less dangerous than the alternative of walking all night until dawn came and the lodging house opened again. What happened next happened quickly, brutally, efficiently. The details are stark, clinical, preserved in police reports and inquest testimony. A throat cut so deeply it nearly severed the head. Mutilations to the abdomen, minimal blood at the scene, suggesting the killer had some anatomical knowledge, knew where to cut to minimize immediate bleeding until the worst wounds could be inflicted. She was found at 3:15 by a cart driver on his way to work. She was lying in a gateway, her clothing disarranged but not removed, her eyes open, staring at nothing. The driver thought she was drunk at first, asleep or passed out, a common enough sight in Whitechapel. He tried to wake her. When he realized she was beyond waking, beyond any help, he ran for a policeman. Constable John Neal arrived minutes later, his bullseye lantern cutting through the fog, illuminating a scene that would haunt him for the rest of his life. He blew his whistle, summoning help, summoning the machinery of law enforcement that would prove utterly inadequate to the task ahead. By dawn, the news was spreading through Whitechapel. Another woman dead, another unfortunate, but this time different, this time worse. The violence of it, the brutality, the clear evidence that this was not a simple fight gone wrong or a customer turned violent in a moment of rage. This was something else, something calculated, something that suggested knowledge and purpose, and a mind that worked in ways normal people couldn't quite comprehend. The police began their investigation. They interviewed witnesses, searched the area, tried to establish a timeline, but Bucks Row had been empty when it happened, or at least empty of anyone willing to admit they'd seen anything. The fog had been thick. The gas lamps were few. The killer had come and gone like a ghost, leaving nothing behind but a body and questions that had no answers. In the lodging houses and pubs, people talked. They always talked when something happened, when violence touched their neighborhood. But this felt different. There was a quality to the crime that unsettled even those who'd seen plenty of violence in their lives. It wasn't just the killing. It was the way it had been done, the precision of it, the suggestion of something purposeful rather than random. The newspapers began to report on it, though not with the attention they'd give it later. Another murder in Whitechapel, another unfortunate dead. Sad, certainly, but not unusual, not remarkable enough to warrant more than a few paragraphs on the inner pages. But in Whitechapel itself, the women who walked the streets after dark began to look over their shoulders more often, began to walk in pairs when they could, began to wonder if perhaps the risk had become too great, the fourpence for a bed not worth the price it might now cost. The fog rolled through the streets, as it always did, indifferent to human concerns, indifferent to violence and fear and death. The gas lamps burned their patient vigils. The city continued its endless motion, and somewhere in those dark streets, someone walked free, someone who'd killed once and would kill again. The streets, after dark. Let us walk together now through Whitechapel in the hours after sunset, when the gas lamps are lit and the fog begins to gather, when the district transforms from its daytime bustle into something else, something quieter, but no less alive, just alive in different ways. The shops are closed now, their shutters pulled down and locked, their windows dark, but the pubs are in full swing, doors opening and closing constantly, each opening, releasing a burst of light and warmth and sound into the street. You can hear singing from some of them, rough voices raised in popular songs of the day. From others comes the lower rumble of conversation, men discussing work or lack of it, politics they can do nothing about, sporting events they can only read about in cheap newspapers. The street vendors are still out, some of them, those who cater to the night crowd. A woman sells hot potatoes from a cart, the steam rising from them visible in the lamplight, the smell of them mixing with the coal smoke and fog. A man offers roasted chestnuts, his small charcoal brazier glowing red in the darkness. Another sells coffee, strong and hot and probably terrible, but welcome nonetheless on a cold night. The crowds have thinned but not disappeared. Men walk home from work, or from the pub, or from wherever they've spent their evening. Some are steady on their feet, some less so. Women hurry by, shawls pulled tight around their shoulders, heading home or to work if they're employed in night work, cleaning offices or factories after the day workers have gone. And then there are the others, the women who move differently, who walk more slowly, who pause in doorways, who make eye contact with passing men, who speak in low voices making offers, negotiating prices, leading customers into alleys or courts, or up staircases to rented rooms. The police are visible, more visible than they were before Polly Nichols died. Constables walk their beats with hands on their truncheons, stopping to look into dark corners, to check locks on shuttered shops, to move people along when they're loitering in places the police have decided are inappropriate for loitering. They nod to familiar faces, exchange brief words, maintain the thin veneer of order that keeps a crowded, desperate district from tipping over into complete chaos. The gas lamps stand at their intervals, each one surrounded by a small sphere of light that barely reaches the next lamp, leaving long stretches of darkness between. In those dark stretches, anything might happen. A quick robbery, a fight, a transaction between two people who want privacy for whatever they're doing. The darkness here is not empty. It's full of movement, of whispered conversations, of business both legal and otherwise being conducted away from official eyes. The fog is thickening now, as it does most nights when autumn settles in. It starts thin, just a slight haziness in the air, a softness to the lamplight. But as the night deepens, as the temperature drops, the fog grows denser, becomes that thick yellow murk that London is famous for, becomes so heavy that it muffles sound, makes distances impossible to judge, turns familiar streets into alien landscapes. Walking through this fog is like walking through a dream, or perhaps a nightmare. Sounds come from strange directions, seem closer or farther than they should be. Footsteps echo, repeat, become impossible to locate. A person can be right next to you, and you might not see them until you almost collide. The gas lamps become mere suggestions of light, fuzzy glows that help only slightly with navigation. In this fog, people become shadows, shapes, silhouettes that appear and disappear. A man walks past, his coat collar turned up against the cold, his face completely hidden. Is he a clerk heading home, a laborer finished with his shift, or someone else, someone with darker purposes, someone who uses the fog as cover for things he doesn't want seen? A woman stands in a doorway, her features obscured, her posture suggesting she's waiting, available, hoping for a customer before the night grows too late and too cold. In daylight, you might recognize her, might know her name, might have spoken to her in the market or passed her on the street. But in this fog, in this darkness, she's anonymous, interchangeable with dozens of others who stand in similar doorways throughout Whitechapel. An alley opens to your right, darker than the street, narrower, the buildings on either side leaning so close overhead they nearly touch. You can hear something moving in that darkness, footsteps, or rats, or something else. The alley smells worse than the street, smells of refuse and worse things, of all the filth that accumulates in places where no light penetrates, where no one bothers to clean because no one important ever looks. You keep walking, staying on the main street, such as it is. Ahead, a pub door opens, and light spills out, and with it comes a man who staggers slightly, grabs the doorframe to steady himself, then sets off down the street singing something tuneless and slurred. He weaves as he walks, occasionally bumping into walls, but he's navigating by memory as much as sight, has walked this route drunk often enough that his feet know the way, even if his eyes don't. A constable appears from a side street, his bullseye lantern throwing a bright beam ahead of him. He stops, plays the light over the building fronts, into doorways, checking for anything out of place. His uniform makes him recognizable even in the fog, the tall helmet, the long coat, the truncheon at his belt. He sees you, nods, moves on. Just another person on the street, nothing suspicious, nothing that requires his attention. The church clock strikes somewhere, the sound rolling through the fog, distorted. The individual strokes hard to count. 11, you think, or perhaps midnight. Time becomes uncertain in the fog, in the darkness, in the strange suspension of reality that nighttime Whitechapel creates. A cat appears from nowhere, materializes out of the fog like a spirit, crosses your path with that unconcerned dignity that cats possess, disappears again into the murk. A good omen or ill? Who can say? In Whitechapel, people are superstitious, carry lucky charms, avoid walking under ladders, throw salt over their shoulders, read meaning into the smallest signs. When life is precarious, when death is always close, people look for patterns, for warnings, for any hint of what might be coming. The lodging houses are winding down now, their kitchens closed, their residents mostly in bed or out in the night, earning money for tomorrow night's bed. Through a window you can see into a dormitory, rows of beds packed close together, lumps beneath thin blankets that are people, sleeping or trying to, getting what rest they can before dawn comes, and the city demands another day's labor. Somewhere ahead, a woman laughs, the sound sharp and sudden in the muffled quiet. Then voices, a man's and woman's, too low to make out words, negotiating or arguing or simply talking. The voices fade, moving away or dropping to whispers or ending as the speakers move indoors. You walk on through the fog, through the gaslit darkness, through streets that have seen everything, streets that have existed for centuries and will exist for centuries more, streets that have witnessed countless dramas large and small, streets that tonight, in this autumn of 1888, are holding their breath, waiting for something that everyone can feel coming, but no one can name. Behind you, footsteps, not close, but steady, matching your pace. You don't turn to look. In Whitechapel, everyone minds their own business, doesn't ask questions, doesn't see things that don't concern them. The footsteps continue for a while, then turn off into a side street, fade into the fog, disappear. Ahead, a square of light falls across the pavement from an open door. Someone steps out, silhouetted against the light, stands for a moment as if deciding which direction to go, then moves off into the darkness. The door closes, and that small square of light vanishes, and the street is dark again, illuminated only by the distant, fog-shrouded gas lamps. This is Whitechapel after dark. This is the world those 5 women knew, the world they moved through night after night, the world that was as familiar to them as daylight streets are to others. This is the world where they lived, and where, in the autumn of 1888, they died. Annie Chapman, September 8th. 8 days after Polly Nichols died, the fog was thick again, the night was cold, and another woman walked the streets of Whitechapel looking for the price of a bed. Annie Chapman was 47 years old, though the life she'd lived had aged her beyond her years. She'd been married to a coachman, had borne children, had known a more comfortable life once upon a time. But that was long ago. Now she lived in the lodging houses, selling flowers or matches or crochet work when she could, walking the streets when she couldn't, doing whatever she had to do to survive one more day, one more night. On this Saturday morning, September 8th, at 1:30, she was at Crossingham's lodging house on Dorset Street. The deputy keeper asked for her DOS money, the 4pence for a bed. She didn't have it. She'd spent it on drink, as Polly Nichols had done, as so many did, because drink was warmth when you had no fire, comfort when you had no friend, forgetting when remembering was too painful. The deputy turned her away, not cruelly, not with any particular satisfaction. This was business. This was how the lodging houses worked. No money, no bed. It was that simple, that absolute. Annie wasn't angry, wasn't surprised. She'd been here before, many times before. "Don't let the bed," she said, meaning, "Save it for me. I'll be back with the money." Then she walked out into the night, into the fog, into the dark streets that she knew so well, that she'd walked so many times before, that she believed she understood, believed she could navigate safely despite what had happened to Polly Nichols just over a week ago. She walked towards Spitalfields Market, where there were always people, always movement, always the possibility of finding a customer. She was feeling unwell, had been sick recently, but need drives people past the point where wisdom would tell them to stop, to rest, to wait for daylight. Somewhere in those hours between 1:30 and 6:15, she encountered someone she thought she could trust, or perhaps someone she knew she couldn't trust but had no choice about. Someone who offered what she needed, money for a bed, for food, for another day of survival. She was last seen alive at 5:30, talking to a man on Hanbury Street. The witness couldn't see the man's face, couldn't describe him beyond saying he was shabby genteel, that strange Victorian phrase that means someone who looks respectable but isn't quite, someone who's fallen down the social ladder but still tries to maintain appearances. They were talking quietly, intimately, standing close together in the pre-dawn darkness. Half an hour later, she was dead. The location was 29 Hanbury Street, a house divided into many small tenements, many families living pressed together. There was a passage through the building leading to a small backyard, barely more than a yard wide and a few yards deep. The passage was used by all the tenants, was always open, led to the outside privies that served the building. Annie Chapman was found in that yard, between the steps and the fence, found by John Davis, a tenant coming down for work at 6:15. Like Polly Nichols, her throat had been cut, nearly decapitating her. But the mutilations were worse this time, more extensive, more purposeful. Items had been arranged near her body, laid out carefully as if staged. Some of her organs had been removed with skill that suggested anatomical knowledge. The killer had done all this in a space barely larger than a closet, with people sleeping just above, with the possibility of someone coming down those steps at any moment. The boldness of it, the audacity, the sheer recklessness suggested either someone insane with confidence or someone who somehow knew he wouldn't be interrupted, wouldn't be caught. The police arrived quickly this time, but quickly wasn't quick enough. The killer was gone, vanished into the fog and the labyrinth of Whitechapel's streets, leaving behind only another body, more questions, more fear. The inquest revealed details that the police tried to keep quiet, but which leaked out anyway, which were whispered in the streets, printed in increasingly lurid detail in the newspapers. The skill of the cuts, the anatomical knowledge suggested, the possibility that the killer might be someone educated, someone from a higher social class than most Whitechapel residents. The neighborhood's reaction was more intense this time. One murder might be terrible, but isolated. Two murders, with the same method, the same type of victim, suggested something else, suggested a pattern, suggested someone hunting, selecting, killing with purpose. The women who walked the streets became more cautious. Some left Whitechapel altogether, sought safer districts, safer ways to earn a living. Others had nowhere else to go, no other options. And so they stayed, but they stayed afraid, walking in groups when they could, avoiding dark places, trusting no one. The pubs were full of talk, of theories, of suspects named and condemned based on nothing more than looking strange or acting suspicious or being a foreigner in a neighborhood that was already full of foreigners, but which wanted someone to blame, someone to fear, someone to identify, and thus make the threat concrete rather than shapeless. The police increased their presence. More constables on the beat, more plainclothes detectives, more attention paid to a neighborhood that usually received very little official attention at all. But the increased presence didn't help. The fog was too thick, the streets too narrow and twisted, the population too transient and suspicious of authority to cooperate fully. And the papers, the newspapers that had given Polly Nichols's death only passing mention, now seized on the story with enthusiasm. The Whitechapel murders, they called them. The Whitechapel fiend. The descriptions grew more elaborate, more horrifying, more detailed than facts alone would justify. The press had discovered that fear sells papers, that the reading public had an apparently insatiable appetite for details of violent crime, especially when that crime involved women, involved poverty, involved the dark underside of the great imperial city. The autumn continued, September moving toward October. The fog came every night now, heavy and thick, turning Whitechapel into something even more maze-like, even more mysterious. The gas lamps burned their patient vigils. The lodging houses filled and emptied, their residents flowing through like water through a pipe. Never quite the same people, but always the same types, the same desperate situations, the same need for fourpence before night fell. And somewhere in those streets, someone walked free. Someone who'd killed twice now, who'd killed with increasing confidence and brutality, who showed no sign of stopping, no sign of fear, no sign of anything except whatever cold purpose drove them to do what they'd done. The women whispered among themselves, shared warnings, shared fears. Stay in groups, avoid dark places, trust no one. Come home before the fog gets too thick. Pay for your bed early so you don't have to go out after dark. Simple advice, but advice that was hard to follow when poverty meant you couldn't always pay for a bed early, couldn't always afford to turn down a customer just because he looked wrong, couldn't always choose safety over survival. The calendar pages turned. September ended, October began. The air grew colder still, the fog grew thicker, the fear grew deeper, settling into the neighborhood like the fog itself, becoming part of the atmosphere, part of the air everyone breathed. And then came the night that would be known forever after as the double event. The double event, September the 30th. Sunday night, the last day of September, the fog was heavy again, lying over Whitechapel like a blanket, muffling sound, obscuring vision. making the already dangerous streets even more treacherous. In the pubs, people drank and talked and tried not to think about what might be waiting outside in that fog. In the lodging houses, those who had their DOS money settled in early, grateful for a bed, for walls and a roof between themselves and whatever walked the streets after dark. But not everyone had fourpence. Not everyone could afford to stay indoors. And so the streets still had their usual nighttime population, reduced but present, necessity driving people out into conditions where fear might otherwise have kept them safely inside. Elizabeth Stride was 45 years old, Swedish by birth, had been in England for many years, spoke English with an accent that made her exotic in some eyes. She worked when she could find work, walked the streets when she couldn't. She had a regular lodging house, had friends, was known in the neighborhood as Long Liz, a woman who smiled despite everything, who kept her spirits up despite the grinding poverty of Whitechapel life. On this night, she was seen in the Bricklayers Arms pub, drinking, talking, seemingly unconcerned despite the murders that had everyone else on edge. Perhaps she felt safe in crowds, in public spaces. Perhaps she needed the drink too badly to let fear keep her from it. Perhaps she simply believed, as so many did, that terrible things happen to other people, not to oneself. At 11:30, she left the pub. She was seen walking toward Berner Street, where many of Whitechapel's socialists and anarchists gathered, where the International Workers' Educational Club occupied a building whose yard would, in less than an hour, become the site of another murder. The club was having a gathering, a discussion, a social evening. People were coming and going, walking through the passage that led to the yard behind the building. There was singing. From inside, the sound of voices raised in political songs, workers' anthems, the sound of people trying to build a better world through solidarity and organization. Elizabeth Stride was last seen alive at 12:35, standing in that passage, talking to a man. The witness couldn't see the man's face, couldn't describe him except to say he wasn't very tall, was dressed in dark clothes, had a soft voice. They were talking quietly, standing close, seemed to be negotiating something. 15 minutes later, she was dead. Louis Diemschutz, the steward of the club, was driving a cart back to the building, returning from a day at the market. His pony shied at something in the passage, refused to enter, had to be coaxed. Diemschutz lit a match to see what was disturbing the animal. There, in the passage, lying against the wall, was Elizabeth Stride. Her throat had been cut, the blood still flowing, still warm, but unlike the previous victims, there were no mutilations. The killer had been interrupted, disturbed by the arrival of Diemschutz and his cart, forced to flee before he could finish whatever he'd intended to do. Diemschutz ran inside, shouting for help. Men poured out of the club, saw the body, saw the blood, realized immediately what had happened. Some ran for police, some went into the streets to look for the killer, though in the fog, in the darkness, the chances of finding anyone were minimal. The police arrived, cordoned off the area, began their investigation. But even as they did, even as they examined the scene, even as they questioned witnesses, another murder was taking place less than a mile away. Catherine Eddowes was 46 years old, had been drinking heavily that evening, had been arrested for being drunk and disorderly at 8:30. The police had taken her to Bishopsgate Police Station, put her in a cell to sober up. A routine matter, happened every night in Whitechapel and throughout London. At 1 o'clock in the morning, she was released. She was sober enough to walk, sober enough to give her name, sober enough to be turned out onto the streets. She walked out into the fog, into the night that had already seen one murder, into streets that should have been safe, but weren't, would never be truly safe again. She walked toward Aldgate, toward Mitre Square, a small square surrounded by warehouses, empty at this hour, quiet, dark, a place where a woman might take a customer for a quick transaction in a corner where the gas lamp didn't quite reach. At 1:45, Constable Edward Watkins walked through Mitre Square on his beat. He saw nothing, no one. The square was empty, quiet, showing no signs of anything unusual. 15 minutes later, at 2 o'clock, he walked through again. Catherine Eddowes was lying in the corner, in the darkest part of the square, away from the gas lamp. Her throat had been cut. The mutilations were extensive, worse than any of the previous murders, worse than anything the doctors who examined her had ever seen. Her face had been deliberately cut, slashed in ways that seemed calculated to destroy her features, to make identification difficult, or perhaps simply to add to the horror of what was already horrible beyond measure. The killer had done all this in 15 minutes, in a public space, with the police constable walking a beat that would bring him through the square twice every hour. The audacity of it, the impossibility of it, the sheer recklessness suggested someone either insane or confident beyond reason. The news spread through Whitechapel like fire through dry grass. 2 murders in one night. 2 more women dead. 2 more bodies bearing the marks of the same killer, the same methods, the same brutal efficiency. The terror that had been building since August, that had been growing with each new murder, now broke over the neighborhood like a wave, drowning the last vestiges of normalcy, of routine, of the belief that this might somehow end, that the killer might be caught, that safety might return. The streets emptied. The women who'd been walking them stopped, fled to other districts, to friends' homes, to any place that seemed safer than Whitechapel's fog-shrouded alleys. The pubs were quieter, the conversations more subdued. Everyone was looking at everyone else, wondering, suspecting, afraid to trust, afraid to speak, afraid to be out after dark, but also afraid to stay in, as if walls might not be enough to keep out whatever walked among them. The police were baffled, overwhelmed, criticized from all sides. The newspapers demanded action, demanded results, demanded that someone be caught and punished. The public wanted answers that the police couldn't provide. How could someone commit 2 murders in one night? How could they escape despite increased police presence? How could no one see anything, hear anything, report anything useful? The Whitechapel Vigilance Committee was formed, local men taking it upon themselves to patrol the streets, to keep watch, to try to protect their neighborhood since the police seemed unable to do so. They walked in groups, carried clubs, stopped anyone who looked suspicious, though in the fog and darkness, everyone looked suspicious. Everyone could be the killer, or no one was. And the truth was simply that they had no idea what they were looking for. The autumn deepened. October continued, cold and foggy and fearful. The gas lamps burned. The lodging houses filled and emptied. The Thames flowed on, carrying the city's refuse to the sea. And in Whitechapel, people waited for what everyone knew was coming. Another murder, another body, another night when the fog would hide terrible things, and the morning would reveal them in all their horror. The letters and the name. It was in this atmosphere of fear and fascination that the letters began to arrive. They came to newspapers, to police, to members of the Vigilance Committee, written in red ink, or sometimes in what might have been blood, though testing was inconclusive, signed with names that would become infamous. Leather Apron, Jack the Ripper, From Hell. The most famous arrived at the Central News Agency on September 27th, 3 days before the double event. It was written in red ink, the handwriting neat but with occasional flourishes, the tone mocking, boastful, written by someone who claimed to be the killer and seemed to revel in the attention, in the fear, in the power they held over an entire district. "Dear boss," it began, and went on to taunt the police, to promise more murders, to sign off with a name that had never been used before, but which would define this case forever. "Yours truly, Jack the Ripper." The letter might have been genuine. It might have been a hoax, written by someone seeking attention, seeking to insert themselves into the drama, seeking the dark thrill of pretending to be the most wanted man in London. The police believed it was likely a hoax, probably written by a journalist seeking to boost newspaper sales, seeking to add fuel to the fire of public interest that was already burning hot. But genuine or not, the name stuck. Jack the Ripper. It had a certain ring to it, a catchiness that newspaper editors loved, that the public seized on, that became shorthand for terror, for mystery, for the unknown threat that walked among them. Before the letter, the murders had been the Whitechapel murders, the Whitechapel terror, described but not personified. Now they had a name, a personality, an identity, even if that identity was false, was constructed, was more myth than reality. More letters followed. One arrived at the Vigilance Committee written from hell, accompanied by what the sender claimed was half a kidney, taken from Catherine Eddowes, preserved in spirits, sent as proof that the letter writer was indeed the killer. Medical examination was inconclusive. It might have been a human kidney. It might have been from Eddowes. It might have been from someone else entirely, from a medical student's dissection, from a hospital's disposal bin, from any of a dozen sources. The letters continued for months, for years, hundreds of them eventually, almost certainly all hoaxes, written by people who wanted attention or thought it was funny or simply wanted to be part of the story, to participate in the drama that had captured the nation's imagination. The police dismissed most of them without investigation, couldn't possibly follow up on every claim, every confession, every taunt. But the damage was done. The name Jack the Ripper had entered public consciousness, had become real in a way that a nameless killer could never be. Now he had personality, had style, had a voice that spoke directly to the public, that taunted and boasted and promised more horror to come. The newspapers printed the letters, debated their authenticity, used them to sell more copies, to fuel the story that seemed to have no end, that generated more public interest than anything else happening in Britain, perhaps in the world. The fear intensified. If the letters were real, if they really came from the killer, then he wasn't just a madman acting on impulse. He was someone who planned, who thought about what he was doing, who wanted recognition, who enjoyed the terror he was causing. That somehow made it worse, made him seem more dangerous, more impossible to predict or stop. And if the letters were hoaxes, if they were written by someone else, then that meant there were multiple people participating in this horror, that the evil wasn't isolated to one person, but had spread, had infected others, had created copycats or wannabes, or people who found entertainment in the suffering of others. Either way, Whitechapel was trapped in a nightmare that showed no signs of ending. The fog continued to roll through the streets. The gas lamps continued to burn. The women who had no choice but to walk the streets after dark continued to walk them, though fewer now, more cautiously, always afraid, always watching, always wondering if the next person they met would be the last person they'd ever see. The police continued their investigation, interviewed hundreds of people, arrested dozens of suspects, released them all for lack of evidence. They tried new tactics, dressed detectives as women to act as bait, though that strategy was quickly abandoned as too dangerous, too likely to result in another dead officer rather than an arrested killer. Theories proliferated. The killer was a doctor, had to be, given the anatomical knowledge displayed. Or he was a butcher, used to cutting meat and familiar with animal anatomy. Or he was a foreigner, a Jew perhaps, someone from outside the community, someone whose difference made him an easy suspect for a neighborhood looking for someone to blame. Or he was a gentleman, someone from a higher social class who came to Whitechapel seeking victims he believed no one would miss or mourn, believing the poor were less than human, less deserving of life or justice. Every theory had its proponents, its evidence that seemed compelling until you looked more closely, until you realized that everything pointed in every direction, that the fog and darkness and confusion had made certainty impossible, had made every explanation equally plausible and equally groundless. October continued, moving toward November. The city held its breath. When would he strike again? Who would be the next victim? Was anyone safe? Could it be stopped? And then, on November 9th, in a small room in Miller's Court, the final canonical murder took place. And it was worse than anything that had come before. Mary Jane Kelly, November 9th. Miller's Court was not a proper court at all, but a passage between buildings on Dorset Street, leading to a small collection of rooms rented out individually, crowded and cheap, and barely fit for habitation. Room 13 was on the ground floor, a single room perhaps 12 feet by 12, with a window facing the passage and a door that opened directly into the room. Mary Jane Kelly lived in that room. She was younger than the other victims, only 25 years old, though she claimed to be 23. She was Irish, had come to London seeking work, seeking opportunity, seeking the better life that the great city promised but so rarely delivered. She was pretty, which was unusual among the unfortunates of Whitechapel, most of whom had been worn down by poverty and drink and disease. Her prettiness might have allowed her to work in better circumstances, to find clients willing to pay more, but it hadn't saved her from ending up in Miller's Court, sleeping in a tiny room and owing rent she couldn't pay. On Thursday night, November 8th, she was seen in several pubs, drinking with various people, singing, seemingly in good spirits, despite being behind on her rent, despite the fear that had settled over Whitechapel, despite everything. At 2 o'clock in the morning, a witness saw her return to Miller's Court with a man, saw them enter her room together, heard her say, "Oh, murder," in what might have been jest or might have been fear, though the witness didn't investigate, didn't check, thought it was just the kind of thing people said. What happened next happened in that tiny room, with Mary Jane Kelly's body found hours later when the landlord's assistant came to collect the overdue rent. He looked through the broken window, saw what was inside, and ran for police. The scene was so horrific that even the experienced detectives who'd seen the previous murders were shocked, were unable to fully process what had been done. The mutilations were extensive beyond description, suggesting hours of work, suggesting someone who'd taken their time, who'd been undisturbed, who'd had the privacy to do things they couldn't do on a street or in a yard where they might be interrupted at any moment. Mary Jane Kelly was the last of what would be called the canonical victims, the 5 murders most definitely attributed to Jack the Ripper. After her death, the murders stopped, or seemed to. There were other violent deaths in Whitechapel, but none with the same method, none with the same signature that had marked these 5. Why did they stop? Nobody knows. The theories are endless. The killer died, fell ill, was committed to an asylum, left the country, was arrested for something else and imprisoned, or simply stopped because he'd achieved whatever purpose drove him, satisfied whatever need these murders filled. The investigation continued for months, for years, but leads dried up. Witnesses had nothing useful to report, and eventually the massive police presence in Whitechapel was withdrawn, the special task force disbanded, the case officially left open but practically abandoned. There would be no arrest, no trial, no execution, no closure for the victims' families or the terrified neighborhood or the fascinated public. Jack the Ripper had vanished as mysteriously as he'd appeared, leaving behind only bodies and questions and a name that would never be forgotten, that would become synonymous with unsolved mystery, with terror, with the dark underbelly of Victorian society. The investigation and the suspects. The police investigation into the Whitechapel murders was massive, thorough, and ultimately futile. Thousands of statements were taken, hundreds of suspects were investigated, dozens were arrested and released. The police tried every method available to them in 1888, used every technique they knew, employed detectives from multiple divisions, brought in specialists, consulted with doctors and scientists and anyone else who might provide insight. But they were handicapped in ways that modern investigators are not. There was no forensic science, no DNA testing, no fingerprint analysis, no security cameras, no cell phone records. Evidence at the scenes was minimal and quickly contaminated by the crowds that inevitably gathered. Witnesses were unreliable, their accounts contradictory, their descriptions so vague as to be useless. The darkness and fog made seeing anything difficult, made determining time and distance nearly impossible. The sheer number of people moving through Whitechapel at all hours made finding the killer like finding a specific grain of sand on a beach. Thousands of men walked those streets every night, any one of whom could have been the killer, most of whom were never seen or noted or remembered. The transient population meant that someone could come into Whitechapel, commit murder, and leave without anyone who knew them seeing them there. The police developed a list of suspects, people they believed might be responsible. Some of these suspects became famous in their own right, their names still debated by historians and amateur detectives more than a century later. There was Montague John Druitt, a barrister and teacher who drowned himself in the Thames in December 1888, shortly after Mary Jane Kelly's murder. His death coincided with the end of the murders, and some police officials believed he was the killer, though there was no actual evidence connecting him to the crimes beyond the timing of his death. There was Aaron Kosminski, a Polish Jew who lived in Whitechapel, who was eventually committed to an asylum with a diagnosis of insanity. Some police officials suspected him, though again, there was no concrete evidence, only suspicion based on his mental illness and his presence in the area. There was Michael Ostrog, a Russian-born criminal with a history of violence and insanity, who was known to carry surgical knives and who was in and out of asylums and prisons. He was suspected, but never charged, never definitively placed at any of the murder scenes. There were dozens of others, each with their own reasons for suspicion, their own circumstances that made them seem plausible, their own histories that suggested they might be capable of such crimes. But none could be proven, none could be definitively linked to the murders through anything more than circumstantial evidence and speculation. Over the years, the list of suspects has grown to include hundreds of names. Every generation of researchers finds new candidates, constructs new theories, presents new evidence that always seems compelling until it's examined closely and found to be as inconclusive as all the evidence before it. Some theories suggest the killer was a member of the royal family or someone connected to the royals, and that the murders were covered up to protect the monarchy. These theories are colorful, but lack any credible evidence and are generally dismissed by serious historians. Other theories suggest the killer was a woman, perhaps a midwife with anatomical knowledge, perhaps someone seeking revenge for some perceived wrong. These theories struggle to explain the strength required for some of the murders, the speed of the attacks, the ability to move through the streets without attracting attention. Still others suggest there was no single killer, that the murders were committed by different people, that the similarities were either coincidental or deliberate copying. This theory solves some problems, but creates others, requiring multiple killers to independently develop similar methods and target similar victims in the same small area. The truth is likely simpler and more frustrating. The killer was probably someone ordinary, someone who blended into Whitechapel's population, who was never suspected by anyone who knew them, who killed for reasons that made sense only to himself, and who either died, moved away, was incarcerated for other crimes, or simply stopped when he'd satisfied whatever drove him to kill. The fog that obscured Victorian London's streets also obscures the truth of these murders. We see shapes in that fog, think we recognize patterns, believe we've found answers. But when we try to grasp them, try to make them solid and certain, they dissolve like the fog itself, leaving us with nothing but questions and the knowledge that some mysteries remain mysteries, some questions remain unanswered, some darkness cannot be illuminated no matter how many lamps we light. The mystery endures. More than a century has passed since the autumn of 1888. Whitechapel has changed almost beyond recognition. The slums cleared away, the buildings torn down and rebuilt. The poverty that defined the district gradually eased through social programs and economic development. The lodging houses are gone, the narrow courts are gone, the specific streets where the murders took place have been renamed or absorbed into larger thoroughfares. But the mystery remains. Jack the Ripper remains the most famous unsolved murder case in history, the one that has spawned more books, more theories, more speculation than any other. The name is known worldwide, recognized by people who know nothing else about Victorian history, who couldn't name a single other criminal from that era, who couldn't place London on a map, but who know about Jack the Ripper. Why does this case continue to fascinate? Perhaps because it combines so many elements that capture human imagination: mystery, violence, the unknown killer who was never caught, the fog-shrouded streets, the Victorian setting with its strange mixture of propriety and squalor, progress and poverty. Perhaps because the victims were women, and their deaths raise questions about society's treatment of the poor, about gender and violence, about who matters and who doesn't. The 5 canonical victims were not wealthy, not important in any conventional sense, not women whose deaths would normally have received much attention. But they became famous in death, became symbols, became representatives of all the forgotten people who lived and died in places like Whitechapel. Perhaps because the mystery is genuinely unsolvable, will never be solved, no matter how many researchers examine the evidence, no matter how many new theories are proposed. There's something compelling about a question that has no answer, about a puzzle with missing pieces that can never be found. It allows everyone to participate, to offer their own theories, to imagine themselves as the one who will finally solve what no one else has been able to solve. The murders changed Whitechapel, changed how society viewed poverty and the poor, changed policing methods, changed journalism and how crimes were reported. The massive press coverage, the serialized nature of the story as it unfolded murder by murder, helped create the modern concept of the serial killer. The idea that someone might kill multiple victims following a pattern for psychological reasons rather than for material gain. The case also highlighted the limitations of Victorian policing, the inability of the authorities to protect the most vulnerable members of society, the way poverty created conditions where violence could flourish and go unpunished. The public outcry over the murders contributed to social reforms, to efforts to improve conditions in the East End, to recognition that allowing such poverty to exist created consequences that affected everyone, not just those trapped in the slums. For the women of Whitechapel, the murders brought immediate and lasting fear. Even after they stopped, even after months and years passed with no new victims, the fear remained. The streets that had always been dangerous became more dangerous. The night that had always held threats became more threatening. Women who walked those streets had to carry the knowledge that someone had killed 5 of their number and escaped unpunished, that justice had not been served, that the killer might still be among them. For the City of London, the murders were a stain, a reminder that beneath the empire's glory and wealth and power, there existed conditions of desperate poverty, that the great engine of British prosperity was built on the backs of people who lived in squalor and died in anonymity. The murders forced attention onto Whitechapel, made it impossible to ignore, made the comfortable classes confront the reality of how the poor lived and died. And for history, the murders became a story that would never end, that would be told and retold in every generation, that would be examined from every angle, that would continue to raise questions about violence and poverty and justice, and the human capacity for both cruelty and fascination with cruelty. The fog has long since lifted from those Victorian streets. The gas lamps have been replaced by electric lights and then by LED lights. The buildings are different, the people are different, the entire context has changed. But the mystery remains, frozen in time, preserved in police reports and newspaper accounts and endless speculation. Jack the Ripper walked the streets of Whitechapel in the autumn of 1888, killed 5 women, possibly more, and vanished. That simple sentence contains all we know with certainty. Everything else is theory, speculation, educated guessing, or pure imagination. The fog that obscured Victorian London still obscures the truth of what happened, who did it, and why. Drifting to sleep. And now, dear listener, as this long journey through 1888 comes to its close, I invite you to let go of the questions, to release the mystery, to allow the past to settle back into the past where it belongs. You've walked with me through Whitechapel's streets, through the fog and the gaslight, through the autumn, when terror walked those narrow lanes, and 5 women lost their lives to violence that was never explained, never solved, never fully understood. Let your body relax now, sinking into your bed, into your pillows, into the comfort of your own space that is so far removed from those Victorian streets, that is warm and safe and yours. Let your breathing slow, become deep and regular, the rhythm of sleep approaching, the tide of consciousness beginning to ebb. The fog outside your window, if there is fog, is just water vapor, just moisture in the air, nothing sinister, nothing threatening. The darkness beyond your walls is just the absence of light, nothing more, nothing waiting, nothing watching. You are safe, you are comfortable, you are drifting. Think about the passage of time, how 1888 is so far behind us now, more than a century removed, another world entirely. The people who walked those streets are all gone, have been gone for generations, their lives complete, their stories told, their struggles ended. The fear they felt has faded, the pain has passed. Only the mystery remains. And even that is just a story now, just history, just something that happened long ago to people who are no more. Your breathing slows further. Your thoughts become less distinct, less focused, beginning to blur and drift like fog itself. Formless, flowing, one thing becoming another without clear boundaries, without effort, without resistance. You're not quite thinking anymore, not quite awake, suspended in that space between consciousness and sleep, where everything softens, where the world loses its sharp edges, where peace settles over you like a blanket. The Victorian streets fade from your mind, the gas lamps dimming, the fog dispersing, the sounds of that distant autumn growing quieter until they're barely whispers, until they're less than whispers, until they're just faint echoes that dissolve into the larger silence that's gathering around you, within you, pulling you down into rest. You sink deeper into your bed, or perhaps your bed rises to meet you. Either way, you're supported, held, cradled in comfort. The weight of your body disappears. The boundaries of where you end and the bed begins blur and fade. You're dissolving into comfort, into warmth, into the gentle embrace of sleep that's been waiting patiently for you all along. One last thought drifts through your fading consciousness. Those women who died in Whitechapel, whose names we remember, whose stories we've told tonight. Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, Mary Jane Kelly. They are at peace now, have been at peace for longer than anyone living can remember. Their suffering ended long ago. Their stories have been told. They are remembered. And that perhaps is what they would have wanted. Not to be forgotten, not to be just numbers or statistics, but to be remembered as people, as women who lived and loved and struggled and died in a time and place that was often cruel, but which they faced with whatever courage they could muster. Sleep is very close now, right at the edge of perception, ready to sweep over you and carry you away to dreams, or to the dreamless rest that's deeper than dreams. That's pure restoration, pure peace, pure release from the day's thoughts and worries and concerns. Your breathing is so slow now that each breath feels like a small journey, in and out, rise and fall, the eternal rhythm that connects all living things, that connected those Victorian women to you across more than a century, that connects you to everyone who has ever breathed, who has ever slept, who has ever sought and found rest at the end of a long day or a long story. The fog in your mind is thick now, obscuring everything, making all thoughts distant and unimportant. The Victorian streets are gone completely, returned to history, returned to the past, leaving only the present moment, only this breath, only this softness, only this peace. You're almost asleep now, balanced on that knife edge between waking and sleeping, so close that one more breath, one more moment, one more gentle slide into darkness will complete the journey, will carry you over the threshold into sleep proper, into the deep rest that your body needs, that your mind needs, that your spirit needs. And so you drift, and so you fall, and so you sleep. The story is over. The history has been told. The mystery remains a mystery, but that's all right. That's as it should be. That's what makes it endlessly fascinating to those who want to wonder about it, but which need not trouble you now, need not keep you awake, need not disturb the peace that's settling over you like fog over Victorian London, thick and complete and inescapable, but this time welcome, this time comforting, this time exactly what you need. Sleep well, dear listener. Rest deeply. Dream softly. And when you wake, the past will still be past, the mystery will still be mysterious, and you will be refreshed, restored, ready for whatever the present day brings. If you enjoyed this journey into history, this walk through fog-shrouded streets, this exploration of one of the greatest mysteries ever recorded, please consider liking this video. Subscribe if you wish to take more of these journeys with me, to explore more forgotten times and distant places, to drift into sleep while history unfolds around you. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell me what mysteries you'd like to explore next, what periods of history call to you, what stories you want to hear as you drift toward dreams. Until next time, sleep peacefully, rest completely, and remember that all the darkness of the past has passed, that we live in safer times, that the fog that obscured Victorian London has long since lifted, and that the only darkness you need concern yourself with is the comfortable darkness of your bedroom, the restful darkness of closed eyes, the peaceful darkness of deep, restorative sleep. Good night.